A 19th-century archaeologist opened a wooden chest in the basement of a forgotten monastery and found something that should not have existed. Roman military training records, meticulously preserved, written in Latin so precise it could only have come from official sources. He read the first page, then the second. By the third, his hands were shaking. He closed the chest, locked it, and buried the key. For 60 years, those documents remained classified. When they finally leaked in the early 1900s, exercise physiologists called the methods described inside impossible. Some called them inhumane. But the numbers did not lie. Rome had built soldiers who did not experience fatigue the way normal humans did. Not metaphorically, literally. Their bodies had been re-engineered through a system so brutal and so effective that modern special forces still study it today, wondering how an ancient civilization discovered principles of human performance that science would not officially recognize for another 2,000 years. If you enjoy uncovering what history tried to hide, subscribe. Because what Rome did to the human body was not training. It was transformation. And the cost of that transformation was something the empire never spoke about openly. Rome had a problem that should have destroyed them before they ever became an empire. Their enemies outnumbered them, consistently, catastrophically. The Gauls could field 300,000 warriors. The Germanic tribes could summon armies that stretched beyond the horizon. Rome, at its peak, might bring half that number to a battlefield, sometimes less. The math was simple, and it was brutal. If you cannot match your enemy's numbers, you must outlast them. And outlasting an enemy is not about courage, or tactics, or even skill with a blade. It is about who is still standing when the sun sets. Who has energy left when everyone else is gasping for air, begging their legs to hold just one more minute? Roman generals understood this with a clarity that bordered on obsession. The side that quits first loses. It does not matter how many men you brought. It does not matter how sharp your swords are. If your soldiers cannot continue, you die. But Rome faced another problem that made the numbers even worse. The empire stretched across 2,500 miles at its height. Soldiers did not march to a battle and then go home for dinner. They marched for months, sometimes years. They arrived at the battlefield already exhausted from the journey, and then they had to fight enemies who had been waiting, rested, fed, ready. The Greeks had it easy in comparison. Their city-states fought wars that lasted an afternoon. Show up. Kill some people, go home, eat bread, sleep in your own bed. Roman wars dragged on for decades. Campaigns that began when a soldier was 20 years old were still grinding forward when he turned 40, and losing was not an option. After the Battle of Cannae, 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. One bad day nearly ended the entire civilization. The Senate understood the message perfectly. Never again could Rome afford to field an army that ran out of energy before the enemy did. The solution required money. Obscene amounts of money. 70% of the Roman state budget went to the military. Not 20%, not 40%. 70. For context, modern nations spend 3 to 4% of their budgets on defense and consider themselves militarized. Rome spent 70 and called it necessary. The math was simple. If you cannot bring more soldiers, each soldier must perform like 3 men. That was not a motivational slogan painted on a temple wall. That was the operational requirement. Every Roman legionary had to march farther, fight longer, and recover faster than any enemy soldier could match. If they failed, the empire collapsed, so Rome built a system. And the system started with 4 months of hell that would break most men before they ever saw a battlefield. Most ancient armies did not train their soldiers. They handed a farmer a spear, pointed him toward the enemy, and hoped for the best. Training took time. Time cost money. Wars did not wait for your men to get ready. But Rome calculated something that changed everything. One properly trained soldier was worth 5 untrained ones. The math worked. They tested it. They measured it. They built an entire military doctrine around it. So while other armies were drafting peasants and throwing them into combat within a week, Rome was taking those same peasants and breaking them down to nothing, then rebuilding them into something that should not have been possible. 4 months. That was the minimum. Not 4 weeks. 4 months of dawn runs that left men vomiting in the dirt. Weapons drills that continued until arms went numb and shoulders screamed for mercy. And when the sun finally started to drop and recruits thought they might get to collapse, that was when the construction work began. Digging trenches, building walls, hauling stones, because apparently exhaustion was not sufficient. The men running this program were called camp doctors, which sounds medical and civilized until you understand that their primary tool was a wooden rod, and their primary method was beating anyone who slacked off. There was no appeals process, no complaints department, just a stick meeting your spine if you did not move fast enough. Roman military physicians tracked recruit fitness with a precision that seems impossible for the era. They documented that soldiers completing the 4-month program had resting heart rates 20% lower than when they arrived. They were measuring cardiovascular adaptation 2,000 years before the term existed. They did not know why it worked. They just knew it did. The 4-month duration was not arbitrary. Rome tested shorter programs. Those produced soldiers who broke under sustained combat. They tested longer programs. Those wasted resources and produced diminishing returns. 4 months was the point where a human body could be rewired from a wheat farmer into something that could march all day and fight all night without collapsing. What happened to men who could not complete the program? They were not sent home. That would have been mercy. They were assigned to labor units and publicly humiliated. Failure meant shame. Permanent, visible shame. But completing the initial training was only the beginning, because what came next was the part that actually built the endurance Rome needed. 18 miles, 3 times per week. That was the standard training march. And the soldiers did not stroll. They covered 18 miles in 5 hours, which is a pace most modern humans cannot maintain for 2 miles, let alone 18. Each soldier carried 60 to 80 pounds of equipment. Armor, weapons, digging tools, cooking pots, rations, everything they would need to survive strapped to their backs. Modern special forces train with similar loads today. The difference is, they wear boots engineered by corporations with research budgets. Romans wore leather sandals on stone roads in summer heat and winter rain. The human foot was not designed for this. But Rome did not care what feet were designed for. They cared what feet could be forced to endure. Why 18 miles specifically? Trial and error. Shorter distances did not trigger sufficient adaptation. Longer distances caused injuries that pulled soldiers out of training for weeks, which defeated the purpose. 18 miles hit the physiological sweet spot where the body was forced to adapt without breaking. And what the body does under this kind of sustained stress is genuinely fascinating. It grows additional capillaries in the leg muscles. More capillaries mean more oxygen delivery to muscle tissue. More oxygen means muscles that can continue contracting long after they should have failed. But the standard 18-mile marches were just the baseline. When actual military necessity required speed, legions executed forced marches of 30 miles or more, and they sustained this pace for days. Julius Caesar's troops once covered 100 miles in 3 days to surprise Vercingetorix in Gaul. They arrived ready to fight. Not ready to rest, ready to fight. The Gauls had expected a week's warning. They got 3 days and a fully operational Roman army at their gates, and they died confused. Legs like that do not happen by accident. They are built through thousands of miles of repetitive punishment. But legs need fuel. And what Rome fed its soldiers might surprise you. Every legionary received 3 pounds of grain daily. That translates to roughly 3,000 calories of slow-burning complex carbohydrates. Not protein shakes, not supplements, just wheat. And they did not receive it pre-ground either. Soldiers had to grind their own flour every single night using a hand mill. Imagine finishing an 18-mile march, then spending an hour working a stone grinder. Your arms are burning. Your back aches. Congratulations, you just completed another workout without even realizing it. Sneaky. Here is what surprised modern nutritionists when they studied Roman military rations. Meat was actually a punishment food. Not punishment exactly, but definitely not the primary fuel source. Roman commanders noticed something that science would later confirm. Soldiers who ate meat-heavy diets fatigued faster on long marches. The reason is digestion. Meat takes hours to break down. Your body redirects blood flow to your stomach when it should be fueling your legs. Complex carbohydrates release energy slowly, steadily, like a drip feed that continues for hours. Modern endurance athletes discovered this principle in the 20th century and called it carb loading. Romans just called it standard operating procedure. Then there was posca, water mixed with vinegar. It sounds disgusting. It was disgusting, but it worked brilliantly. The acidity killed bacteria that would otherwise cause dysentery. It replaced electrolytes lost through sweating. It was ancient Gatorade, except it tasted like salad dressing, and nobody complained because complaining meant the stick. One more detail that reveals how thorough Rome was in controlling every variable. Each 8-man squad shared cooking duties. Nobody ate anything their tent mates had not also prepared and consumed. If someone tried poisoning the food, they would kill their own friends. The system eliminated sabotage through collective responsibility. But feeding soldiers was only half the equation. Training them to fight without exhausting themselves required an even smarter trick, one that modern sports science would not officially discover for another 2,000 years. Roman training swords weighed twice as much as real ones. Not by accident, by design. The wooden practice sword, the one recruits swung at posts all day long, was deliberately heavier than the steel gladius they would carry into actual combat. It seems backwards. You would think training with lighter equipment would build speed. But consider the psychology. You spend 4 months swinging a 6-pound wooden sword. Your arms burn. Your shoulders scream. You want to quit every single session. Then someone hands you a 3-pound real gladius, and suddenly you feel like you could swing it forever. The weight difference creates a psychological and physiological advantage. Modern trainers call this overload training. They did not officially discover it until the 1950s. Romans figured it out 2,000 years earlier, without a laboratory. Recruits practiced against wooden posts called a palus. 1,000 strikes per session, every day. 1,000. Not 100. 1,000. Your arm would fall off just thinking about it. But the result was a soldier who could swing a real sword for hours without his arm dropping from fatigue. Fresh recruits could be identified instantly during extended drills. Their sword arms started sagging after 20 minutes. Veterans could maintain form for hours because their bodies had been conditioned with equipment that made real combat feel easy by comparison. But heavy weapons training only works if soldiers have the stamina to keep fighting. And building that kind of endurance required something most armies would consider insane. Every single night, without exception, Roman legions built a fully fortified camp. After marching 20 miles with 80 pounds of gear, after drilling with weapons, after grinding grain, they grabbed shovels. A 3-foot trench surrounding the entire perimeter. Wooden walls on top, guard towers, organized streets inside, the whole thing. Even if they were marching out at sunrise and never returning. This nightly construction burned roughly 800 extra calories per soldier, after everything else. And it took about 3 hours to complete. Most people today cannot comprehend this level of sustained physical output. But here is what Rome understood that nobody else did. This was not punishment. It was the ultimate work capacity builder. Modern trainers have a term called work capacity. It means how much total physical output your body can handle before shutting down. And there is only one way to increase it. You do more work. The nightly fort building created soldiers who could perform absurd amounts of physical labor without their bodies failing. They became machines. And the repetition made it automatic. Some soldiers could dig trenches while half asleep. Their bodies just executed the movements without conscious thought. But the tactical payoff was something nobody expected. Enemies learned very quickly that attacking a Roman camp was suicide. Those walls were not decorative. So while Germanic warriors stayed awake all night worrying about raids, Roman soldiers slept like children behind fortifications they had built with their own hands. Better sleep means better recovery. Better recovery means more energy tomorrow. The exhausting nightly ritual actually gave Romans more rest than their opponents. Now imagine those well-rested soldiers entering an actual battle. That is where the system revealed its true genius. Most ancient battles functioned like bar fights. Everyone rushes in, swings until exhausted, and whoever is still standing wins. The Celts fought this way, the Germans fought this way, nearly every army in the ancient world fought this way. Rome looked at this approach and decided it was stupid. Their solution was rotation. Fighters cycled like a sports team substituting players. Every 15 to 20 minutes, fresh soldiers stepped forward while tired ones fell back to recover. It sounds simple. Executing it in the middle of combat where people are actively trying to kill you is the hard part. The maniple system, and later the cohort system, built gaps directly into the battle line. Not mistakes, intentional gaps. Tired soldiers could slip backward through these spaces without breaking the formation. Meanwhile, rested men pushed forward. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, you waste fresh energy. Too late, your front line collapses from exhaustion. Enemy warriors found this absolutely maddening. One Germanic chieftain reportedly complained that fighting Romans was like fighting an army that never got tired. He was not wrong. He just did not understand the mechanism. Celtic warriors especially could not comprehend it. Their culture valued individual combat and personal glory. When a Roman stepped back from a fight, they assumed he was retreating in fear. Then a fresh Roman appeared, and the exhausted Celt faced someone who had not swung a sword in 20 minutes. A single Roman soldier might fight 6 separate 15-minute sessions across a 3-hour battle, still dangerous at the end, still lethal. This system demanded something specific from each soldier, not strength, not courage, trust. And building that trust required skills that most armies never considered training. Swimming in armor. Every Roman legionary had to master this, not as an optional skill, as a requirement, because drowning during river crossings killed more soldiers than many actual battles. And when you swim wearing 60 pounds of metal, your lungs adapt. They expand. They learn to work differently. That same lung capacity transferred directly to sword fighting, to hours of shield work, to not gasping for air while some warrior was trying to remove your head. But swimming was just the beginning. Wrestling happened daily. Roman wrestling was not sport. Matches did not end when someone got pinned. They continued until one man physically could not stand anymore. Sometimes that took 30 minutes, sometimes longer. The goal was not to be stronger. It was to be the last one still moving. In actual combat, weapons get dropped. Shields break. Soldiers fall into mud. The man who knew how to fight with his bare hands while completely exhausted walked away. The man who did not died. Modern trainers call this hybrid athletic conditioning. Romans just called it necessary. The marching built legs, swimming built lungs. Wrestling built the ability to continue when everything else failed. But none of it mattered if the mind quit first, and that is where Roman training became genuinely terrifying. Roman commanders understood something centuries before psychology existed as a science. Your body is not what quits first. Your brain does. Centurions knew this. So during training, they would run soldiers until their legs shook, then order them to solve complex formation drills, build defensive positions, recite military protocols from memory. Cruel, perhaps, but genius. Roman military doctrine contained a fascinating observation. Panic burns more energy than actual fighting. A calm soldier could last twice as long as a terrified one doing identical physical work. The body follows wherever the mind leads. Modern research confirms this completely. Mental fatigue makes your body quit before your muscles actually fail. Your brain lies, screaming, "Stop when you still have 30% left." Romans understood this instinctively. That is why soldiers memorized responses to dozens of battlefield scenarios. Enemy cavalry approaching from the right. They knew exactly what to do. Line breaking on the left flank. Automatic response. No thinking required. Because thinking costs energy. Decision-making under stress exhausts you faster than swinging a sword. Then there was the sacramentum, the military oath. Soldiers swore it before gods and comrades, creating psychological commitment that pushed physical limits further than training alone ever could. They had promised. Breaking that promise meant something. But perhaps the simplest trick was breathing control. Roman soldiers trained to regulate their breathing during combat, slow, controlled breaths between sword strikes. This kept heart rates manageable and delayed exhaustion by measurable amounts. Even the toughest mind needs the right tools. And Roman equipment was engineered for one purpose: energy conservation. The lorica segmentata distributed weight across the entire torso. Shoulders, chest, hips, everything shared the burden. Compare this to chainmail, which dumped 60 pounds straight onto your shoulders. After 2 hours, you are fighting gravity more than the enemy. The real genius was the scutum shield. That curved rectangular monster weighed 22 pounds, which sounds brutal for all-day fighting. But the curve allowed soldiers to rest it against their bodies during breaks in combat. Your arm gets relief while you remain protected. Straight shields kill your arm in minutes. The curved Roman design could be held far longer. Then there is the gladius, short, brutal, efficient. Why did Romans not use long swords like barbarians loved? Because swinging a 3-foot blade exhausts you. The gladius measured only 20 inches. Soldiers learned to thrust, not swing. A 6-inch stab to the gut kills just as effectively as a dramatic overhead chop, but uses 1/5 the energy. The helmet design solved overheating. Slots and gaps allowed airflow while protecting the skull. Germanic helmets looked impressive. Roman helmets kept you conscious after hour 3 of combat. And standardization meant every piece of equipment was identical across the entire army. Drop your sword, grab your dead comrades. It fits your hand perfectly. No adjustment needed. You are back in the fight within seconds. Each small design choice served the same goal. But equipment only matters if soldiers can keep fighting after taking damage. Which brings us to something Rome invented that nobody else considered. Rome had hospitals. Actual hospitals with surgeons, recovery rooms, and rehabilitation programs. Every legion traveled with trained physicians called medici. These were not men with bandages and prayers. They understood anatomy, infection, and most importantly, how to return wounded soldiers to combat readiness. Most ancient armies, if you got hurt, your friends dragged you aside and hoped. Maybe someone's grandmother knew a healing ritual. That was healthcare. Romans built permanent military hospitals called valetudinaria. These facilities had surgical theaters, separate wards for different injuries, and dedicated staff whose only job was rehabilitation. Physical therapy in the ancient world. But Roman medicine focused on one goal: getting soldiers back to fighting strength. Not just alive, fighting. Doctors noticed something during recovery. Soldiers who stayed somewhat active healed faster than those on complete bed rest. Modern sports medicine rediscovered this exact principle 60 years ago. Romans figured it out through observation 2,000 years earlier. For wound treatment, medics carried vinegar, honey, and wine. All three have genuine antibacterial properties. They did not know why it worked. They knew wounds treated with these substances infected less often. The survival statistics tell the story. A Roman soldier who survived his initial wounds had an 80% chance of returning to active duty. Medieval armies centuries later, less than 40%. But keeping soldiers healthy was only half the equation. Rome needed them to stay effective for decades. 25 years. That was the service requirement. Not a few campaigns. Not until the war ended. A quarter century of marching, fighting, building. By year 5, something happened inside these men. Their hearts literally grew larger. Bones became denser. Lung capacity expanded beyond normal human ranges. These changes were permanent. A cardiologist who studied ancient skeletal remains said Roman veteran bones looked like they belonged to a different species. Decades of weighted marches had remodeled them completely. Veterans in their 40s routinely outperformed fresh recruits in their 20s. Young men should dominate. They did not. Endurance training compounds like interest. A 40-year-old with 20 years of conditioning had a biological engine no 20-year-old could match. The pension system was genius. Soldiers only received land grants if they completed full service. Die early, nothing for your family. Discharged for poor health, nothing. This motivated soldiers to maintain fitness like nothing else could. And knowledge transfer was systematic. Senior soldiers passed every conditioning trick to new recruits. Institutional memory spanning generations. When veterans finally retired to colonies throughout the empire, Rome did not lose them. They became ready reserves, men in their 50s who could still march 20 miles and fight at the end. Rome did not just build soldiers who could not be worn down. They built a system that manufactured tirelessness for 700 years. Every empire since has tried to copy it. None have succeeded completely. Most history books skip this part. They talk about tactics, about famous generals, about battles won and lost. But they do not talk about what it cost to build men who could march 30 kilometers, dig fortifications for 3 hours, sleep 6 hours, and wake up ready to do it again. They do not talk about the thousands who failed the training and spent the rest of their lives branded as failures. They do not talk about the bodies that broke, the minds that snapped, the price paid in human suffering to create an army that could not be exhausted. History remembers monuments. It forgets the ditches dug every night, the trenches filled every morning, the wheat ground by hand in darkness, the wooden swords swung until arms went numb. It forgets that Rome's greatest weapon was not the gladius or the pilum or the testudo formation. It was the ability to continue when every other army in the world had already quit. Subscribe to uncover more.